Welcome to another Friday night. Tonight we're going to talk about how trauma affects the brain. So it's not going to be as heavy as the two on shame. So you may not get wrecked as much tonight, but I will let you know that for some people this is heavy, because what you're going to begin to see is that trauma, it really messes us up. And so a lot of people, when I'm done this talk on the brain, they have a new sense of just how messed up they are, and that the journey to healing and recovery is going to be slow, long, and take a lot of work. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So there's going to be a lot of information that I'm going to try to kind of bombard you with. Hopefully you enjoy it. What I have found fascinating is the more we learn about the brain, and the brain is this amazing organ we have that has been kind of the least understood, the more we understand about the brain through brain scanning and brain imaging, the better we've understood trauma. And the better we've been able to make sense out of a whole bunch of things. So this whole brain thing is so critical. So these are 2 3-year-old children. So the one on the left is a child born in a very loving, nurturing home. The child on the right is a child who was neglected. See the difference in the brain size. So what I want you to see, little t trauma, which we talked about, basically neglect, needs not being consistently met, that causes the brain not to develop properly. It has an effect, even in a child, on the development of the brain. So let me give you kind of the very basic anatomy of the brain. So there's 3 main parts. There's lots of technical pieces, but the 3 main parts. So the orange part at the bottom is the brain stem. So that's the part of the brain that develops first. It grows first, and that's the part that looks after your heartbeat, your pulse, your blood pressure, your digestive system, all your organs, your breathing. It's the part of your brain that keeps you alive. And it's responsible for your most basic life-giving functions. Then in childhood, the next part develops, which is the limbic brain. So you may have heard of the amygdala and the hypothalamus. That's all part of the limbic brain. And then the next part is the cortex, the cerebral cortex, which is prefrontal cortex. That part develops on into your 30s. That's the thinking part of your brain, the reasoning part of your brain. So I want to start and focus mainly on the limbic brain and the cortex, because this is critical in understanding trauma. So your limbic brain, like I said, it develops in childhood. So that's the brain the child has. They don't have a cortex yet that has developed. So now you might understand why your children have been the way they are. So your limbic brain is basically your emotion brain. So it's your survival brain. And so that's where fear is felt. So that's survival. Fight, flight comes out of your limbic brain, but it's your emotion brain. So think of a child who only has an emotion brain. What is characteristic of an emotion brain? Well, a child makes all of its decisions not based on thinking it through. Is this good for me or healthy long term? They go, I don't feel like doing my chores. I don't feel like doing my homework. All their decisions are based on how they're feeling. And if they're feeling motivated, they want to do something. If they're not feeling motivated, they don't want to do something. So that's how they make decisions, is how I am feeling. More than that, a child's limbic brain, when they make decisions, their decisions are based on instant gratification. Will this make me feel good now? Or survival, will this keep me safe now? So if you were to offer a child Brussels sprouts or a chocolate bar? Chocolate bar. Because it makes me feel good now. So all decisions are based on instant gratification. So that's the child's brain. So guess what a child needs? He needs a parent with a cortex. So the limbic brain of the child has been referred to as the foolish brain. Because if you just make decisions based on how you feel, I'm motivated today, I'm not motivated today, you're not going to have a very consistent life. You're going to end up with a foolish decisions. And if you only focus on instant gratification, you're going to make a lot of dumb decisions. So your limbic brain leads to foolish type behavior and decisions. So you need a wise cortex. And that's what gradually develops into adulthood, into your 30s it takes to finally develop. That's where you think things through. That's your reasoning thing. So a wise brain, it makes decisions based on not how I feel, but based on long-term consequences. Is this good for me? So I don't feel like doing my chores, but I know if I don't, I'm going to regret it. I know if I do, the house will be better. And so I'm going to do it because it's right. It's healthy. So a wise brain. So a child needs a parent who has a wise brain to help guide them as their cortex develops. So what does the limbic brain child say to the parent? I hate my parents. My parents are so mean. Then when they get 20, if you have been a good parent, they go, wow, my parents are the wisest parents in the world. Why? Because their cortex is finally developing. They're getting out of their limbic brain and being able to think things through. But what happens in complex trauma? You don't get that. And so, not only is your cortex not given a good role model that teaches it long-term wisdom, but you feel in danger all the time. And when you feel in danger all the time, what part of the brain is activated? Limbic. And so the tragedy of complex trauma is the child never develops, even after they become an adult, out of their limbic brain. It still runs things because they're still feeling in danger. And so their brain doesn't develop much past their limbic brain. Their cortex develops in that they develop skills for a job. They develop a lot of skills for how to keep a house and do things in life. But they don't get a lot of life wisdom built in because they're in their limbic brain. And that causes all kinds of trouble. So let me give you 4 more complex trauma characteristics. So we ended last time with 25. So here's number 26. People coming out of complex trauma have a big issue around instant gratification. Because what happens as soon as they feel uncomfortable, stressed, unpleasant emotions? I don't like this. I want something to make me feel good now. So I'm going to relapse to my drug. I'm going to go distract myself and binge watch TV for hours. I'm going to do something just to not feel anything because I want to feel good now. Or they start to say, I got to lose weight or I got to get in shape. So they do it for a little while because they're motivated in their limbic brain, but then it starts to become a routine and they go, this is boring. I don't feel like doing this anymore. And they stop. Why? Because their limbic brain is still running the show. They haven't yet translated or transferred into their cortex as the main manager. So you can imagine that as long as a person makes instant gratification focused decisions, they're going to make a lot of foolish decisions. Because that's what a child does. And that is what happens, sadly. The next one is great starters, poor finishers. I say the best people in the world to hire are people with trauma for the first week. After that, it becomes boring. And then they don't want to do it. I work with people all the time that have started hundreds of projects and never finished one. So they get in their limbic brain, I need to do something, I'm all excited about this new thing, and is this going to solve all my problems, this is going to be wonderful. They do it, then it starts to get routine, gets to be boring, and they stop. Great starters, terrible finishers. Why? Because their limbic brain is running the show. And so you can see that can lead to all kinds of problems. The next one is even bigger. And we call it emotional reasoning. So it is that you reason not out of an objective wise cortex, you reason out of a limbic brain. So what does a child say if you said no to them? It says, it feels like you don't like me, so you must not like me. So truth is not based on facts. Truth is based on how my limbic brain is feeling. So you said no to me, that feels like rejection, so you must be rejecting me. That's emotional reasoning. So that is huge for people because I had somebody come up and they wanted to come and talk to me right away, but I had two people standing there talking to me, and it was an important conversation. And I just said, give me a minute. They left triggered, mad. They were hurt. They felt disrespected. Why? Because it felt like that based on how they've been treated as a child. So it felt like it, so they concluded it was true. And I said, no, that's not true. I had two people talking to me. You could wait. I wasn't disrespecting you. I was teaching you that that's not appropriate what you're doing. And so thankfully we were able to work through it. But the point is, they went into a downward spiral because my response saying, please wait, triggered their limbic brain, which then went to reasoning. It feels like this, so this must be the truth. And it was totally a lie that they ended up on. So emotional reasoning can cause people to downward spiral big time. Then the next one is distorted thinking. And it goes with that, but it's all the distortions that can come into play for people. So one of the ones that I see all the time is people that come out of complex trauma. They live in a very insecure world. Nothing's for sure. Everything's changing all the time. So they're attracted to very rigid black and white thinking, and we talked about that. But that can go to all or nothing thinking. So it's all white or it's all black. And so when they come into recovery, it's basically this. I'm working 100% in recovery or I'm failing. I'm doing it perfectly or I'm doing it all wrong. There's no middle ground. There's no allowance for anything. So that is distorted thinking. Because now if I'm not doing it perfectly, well, I might as well give up. I'm failing, and they beat themselves up. Or they sabotage it. And so it's learning that they're still in this limbic brain that is saying, unless I'm feeling I'm doing it perfectly, I'm failing. They don't know how to think any other way than those extremes. So distorted thinking is a huge issue. We do a whole bunch of lectures on that because there's so many subtle pieces. I'm not going to get into it. I just want to kind of lay it out for you as one of the characteristics. Okay, so that's the first part of the brain, and the issues around the brain is the brain. Trauma causes a person to get stuck in their limbic brain, and that causes massive problems in adult life. Next, trauma changes the brain chemicals. So you have basic brain chemicals that are designed to be in your brain. So dopamine is the pleasure chemical that makes you feel good when you do something. Then you have serotonin, which is the very warm, everything's good, overall I'm content chemical. Then you have oxytocin, which is the love drug connection chemical. I feel close to you, I feel connected to you. And then you have endorphins that come out of exercise, work, activity, that make you just get the rush from that, the feel-goods from that. So those are all, the 4 chemicals basically are all positive emotion-giving chemicals. That's what I want you to see. Okay? If you're living in danger, none of those 4 chemicals happen. They all stop. So if you think of a person with complex trauma constantly feeling in danger, they're not feeling the 4 feel-good chemicals. So guess what they're feeling? Empty, blah, depressed, anxiety, negative. Life isn't worth living. Life is dull. So trauma right away takes the 4 chemicals the brain was designed to experience out of the picture. Then it brings in 3 chemicals, and these are critical to understand. And I'm going to show you the difference between complex trauma and simple trauma, one-time event trauma, with these chemicals as we go along. So the first is cortisol. So cortisol is released when you're in fear or you're angry. And that's what gives a shot to your adrenal gland, which gives you energy to fight or flight. It's a survival chemical. You're in danger. You need a boost of power to fight harder or run faster. So cortisol is fantastic for that. But I'm going to develop this cortisol for a bit. The second thing that cortisol does is it takes what has just happened and burns it into your memory. Basically, it's saying, this is so bad, never forget it. So it never happens again. You can always be prepared for it. So it burns it into your memory. So what I want you to see is cortisol is a fantastic chemical. But here's the hitch. Danger is designed to be only rare, for short little periods of time. Cortisol comes in, helps you get out of the danger. It is resolved, the cortisol stops, and you go back to the other 4 chemicals. So it is designed to be for only short periods of time, very rarely. What happens with complex trauma, where you're not out of danger? You got cortisol pumping all the time, none of the other 4 good chemicals, and the brain was not designed for cortisol to pump all the time. So here's what happens when cortisol pumps all the time. You have your left hemisphere of your brain and your right hemisphere of your brain. Then there's a bridge called the corpus callosum that joins the 2, so they can talk to each other. When cortisol is pumping all the time, it burns that bridge, so they don't talk properly to each other. Now this is where it gets complicated. Your brain actually, when you go through an experience, it stores 2 parts of that experience, one in the right hemisphere, one in the left hemisphere. In the one hemisphere, it stores the details of what just happened. In the other hemisphere, it stores the emotions of what just happened. When you've got the bridge there, if the emotion gets triggered, it can remember the details that cause that emotion. Or if you're in a situation where there's the details, you can connect immediately to the emotions. What happens when that is broken, that is burnt? You're going to get 2 scenarios. You're going to get somebody, number 1, who has what we call emotional flashbacks. All of a sudden they're walking down the street, they hear a sound, and they're ducking and rolling, and they don't know why. Because they have no details of any memory in their past, because that bridge is gone. They're triggered, they're acting, they don't know why. Or they're in a relationship with somebody says something, all of a sudden they're vibrating. They don't know why, because they don't have details of any memory connected to those emotions. That's part 1. Part 2 is, I don't know if you've ever met somebody who doesn't have memories of their childhood. They don't remember the details. They've got emotions. They got lots of fear and anxiety and depression stuff going on. They've got 5-year gaps in their memory, 6, 10-year gaps. It's blank. That bridge is burned. Or you'll get somebody who remembers the details and they don't have the emotion connection. So they say, oh yeah, I was raped. Yeah, I was sexually abused. Yeah, my dad used to beat me. And you think they're reading a grocery list. There's zero emotion connected to it. Why? Because the bridge has been burned. And so cortisol in burning that bridge causes all kinds of issues around memory. So that's memory gaps there, number 30, 31, emotional flashbacks. So that's huge. Now let me give you the next thing that comes out of this. What happens when a person has trauma as an ongoing thing, so ongoing danger? It sets in the brain a default setting in the stress system. So this is my normal. I'll get used to this. This is what I might as well expect. So that becomes their normal default setting. What happens then when a person gets into a healthy life where there's not chaos, there's not drama, there's not violence, there's not yelling and screaming, there's not all kinds of things going on? Here's their normal for their stress setting. Now healthy is here. Their brain says something's wrong. This doesn't feel right. In fact, this feels dead. This feels boring. And so without realizing it, what actually happens, and this is all in the subconscious brain, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, what happens is I need to get back to here to feel normal. This feels wrong. This doesn't feel safe. And so they will sabotage good things happening in their life and create chaos just to feel subconsciously normal. And so what we say is that people coming out of trauma have a tendency to become addicted to chaos, addicted to drama, because that's their normal. And without even being conscious that they're doing it, they can sabotage good times where things are going well just to get back to drama, or they can get drawn into other people's drama to try to feel alive. Let me see if I can put that and take that a little bit further for you. What happens with people coming out of trauma is they get addicted to chaos. They need the adrenaline to feel alive. That's the only thing that gave them energy. That's the only thing that made them feel like living. So they become addicted. So what we do know now from the research is your brain can become addicted to cortisol and adrenaline. And so now it wants you to relapse to it so it gets its fix. And so you create chaos to get the rush. Some people will wake up and purposely try to get themselves angry to get cortisol happening. That'll give them energy now for the day. Well, you can realize what that's going to do to relationships. That's not going to work well. Now, I got to take it a step further, because another thing can happen for people, and that is if you've had cortisol pumping because you've been in trauma since complex trauma, neglect trauma, little t, big T, since you were a child, you can actually become allergic to cortisol. So now when you're in a situation where you get a shot of cortisol, it has the reverse effect on you. Now you feel like crap. Now you just want to go to bed. You feel like you got hit by a truck. And so your body gets to the point where it goes, if you keep getting all of this cortisol, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to destroy your brain. We're going to look at other effects of cortisol in a minute. But it's going to ruin you, so I am going to develop an allergy to it. That'll help you not want to go there. And so that has happened to many people, and some of you are nodding like it's happened to you. So the next thing that cortisol does, so Dr. Gabor-Mate has written a book called When the Body Says No. And basically it's based on all of the latest research over the last 10 years into cortisol. So if you take a look at 90% of the illnesses in the West, in Canada and the US, they are all related to stress. And what is stress? It releases cortisol because I feel in danger. What happens when I don't want to be going crazy? I repress all of that energy and repress that cortisol, hold it all in. And so what they're finding is all of that cortisol, not just in the brain, but running through your body because it's going to give you that extra energy. What it begins to do is break down the body. And so that's why Dr. Gabor-Mate calls it when the body says no, because what eventually happens is the body says enough, and it starts getting sick. So when they look at your autoimmune diseases today, and Dr. Gabor-Mate has just written a second book called The Myth of Normal, and he adds even more research, especially around the autoimmune diseases. What they are finding, it's cortisol related. It's too much cortisol. And it starts to cause inflammation in the immune system throughout the body, so the body can't defend itself. So let me put that another way. What they're finding is this. People that spend their time meeting all 12 of the needs, and we talked about that a while ago, they don't need to have cortisol because they're safe. Their needs are being met. Their body can rest and relax. And we're going to look next time what's going on with that. That's when the body is at the optimum place to defend itself against bacteria and disease and viruses. If the body is stressed, there's cortisol, it starts shutting down the body's natural defense systems, and now you become more subject to all the other diseases and bacteria and viruses. And so what they're finding is, that's part one. Part two is prolonged cortisol starts to wear down the body. It starts to damage the body. It starts to damage the organs. So if I can take it further, what they're now finding is when you look at your organ-related illnesses, so diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, cortisol. Very, very interesting. So you can look into that further. It's being well documented now. It's quite fascinating. So that's cortisol, and that's where a ton of the damage is done. Next chemical is oxytocin. Now, what's interesting, that was one of the good positive chemicals. That's the love connection chemical. So every time that you hug somebody, kiss somebody, hold a baby, have sex, the body releases oxytocin, and you feel connection, you feel love. That's what that's all about. Take that further, the greatest release of oxytocin is when a woman is having a baby, and that is so, it deadens the pain of the delivery, but as soon as that baby that just tore her insides apart is born, that mom doesn't hate it, she wants to connect with it. And then when a mother nurses, it releases a massive amount of oxytocin to help in the attachment bonding between mother and child. So it's all about connection, attachment, bonding. And it's a chemical that helps make that possible. And so how does that apply to trauma? It's released one other time when we're in danger. So what happens when a child sees a scary dog? It releases oxytocin. And what does it make the child want to do? Run to mom or dad for protection. And when mom and dad see their child scared, what does it do? Release oxytocin in their brain, and they want to run and hug and protect the child. So it is the response, the chemical in the brain that says you're too little to handle this problem, Run to somebody who loves you, who will protect you and care for you. That's the purpose of oxytocin. Now let me bring in complex trauma. So you're abused, you're neglected. You are in pain. You run to mom. Oh, mom's too busy. Dad's angry. All that oxytocin now has no fruition. It has nobody to reciprocate it. So what does a child have to do? Well, this is stupid. This only leads to more pain. Every time I follow through on run to mom, run to dad, I end up getting hurt even worse. Let's shut down oxytocin. Let's not listen to it. And they shut down the oxytocin system. Now, what tends to happen out of that? Two things. They grow up and become an adult and they have a child. They don't feel a connection to it because their oxytocin system's not working. They look at that child and they go, I don't feel much for it. And they feel guilty. And it's like anorexia. It takes a while. When you shut down a natural system like hunger, and now you've shut down oxytocin, it takes a while to retrain it. And the same is true with oxytocin. It takes a long time to retrain it to operate again. There's a second option. That child shut down oxytocin, never felt love, never felt anybody was there to nurture and comfort them. They hit their teenage years and they have their first relationship, sex, and they get a flood of oxytocin and they go, this is the greatest thing in my life, and they become a sex addict, a relationship addict, chasing more oxytocin, becoming addicted to their next hit of oxytocin. And sadly, for many people that come out of trauma, they become relationship addicts, relationship junkies, looking for their next oxytocin hit. Okay, third, opioids. So you know we're in an opioid crisis. But let me show you kind of what happens. The problem with complex trauma is it usually happens to children. Not always, but usually. What's the natural cortisol response? Fight, flight. What happens if you're too little to fight? Too little to flight? You can't run away. You can't beat dad up. What's your next option? Cortisol is not helping you. The brain kicks in freeze or fawn, your two other F's. And what does it do to help you freeze and fawn? It stops the cortisol's intensity and releases the brain's natural opioids. So here's what I want you to understand. When cortisol is released in the body, what it does is it takes blood and it sends it to the extremities, to your feet, your hands, and it sends extra sugar. Why? So you got extra blood and energy to fight and flight. And it fills it up with oxygen. That's why your breathing picks up and your pulse picks up when cortisol is going. But if you can't fight or flight and opioids come in, you want to know what they do? They take all the blood from the extremities and they pool it into the heart area. Why? To get ready to get hurt. You're going to get hurt now. We're going to take as much blood from the extremities away in case you get cut or shot or whatever, and we're going to put it all around the heart to help you not get hurt, so you won't bleed as much. Then we're going to release opioids to deaden the pain that's going to come when you get hurt. So it does the exact opposite. Now take that a bit further. What happens with fight or flight is I want to escape in my external world. What the child is realizing is I can't escape in my external world, so opioids allow me to escape into an internal world where I can feel safe. And they give me the feelings of safety. So if you talk to most people that have used opioids, many of them will tell you it's like being wrapped in a warm blanket. They feel safe. What is going on there? The child, technical word is they dissociate. And dissociate means you retreat into yourself, into an internal world that's not real, that enables you to escape reality. It's a fantasy world that you create that allows you to feel safe. And opioids makes all of that happen. So, cortisol, oxytocin, and if those aren't helping, okay, let's bring on the opioids. So, guess what the next characteristic is going to be? Many people coming out of complex trauma, I need drugs. And as soon as they find drugs, they go, I just found the solution to my problems. Now I can go to that safe feeling place anytime I want. And that is why addiction happens. So that hopefully helps you understand that. But take that further. For many people that don't go to the drug route, guess what happens to the child or teenager who starts cutting? It releases opioids. So they don't feel the pain, they actually feel relief. They feel comfort. And so when you look at a cutter and go, what in the world are they thinking? They're getting a hit of opioids. The same is true with kids who burn themselves, bang their head on a wall. It's triggering an opioid release. And that's what they're craving. So those all come out of, again, trauma. So let me just take this dissociation thing further. The bottom line, dissociation is really a broad spectrum. So the extreme dissociation is the person who, when they're being sexually abused, they're kind of like they're in out-of-body experience. They're on the roof watching it happen like it's happening to somebody else. Or they can take themselves to a beach in the Bahamas and just not even be in their own body. That's the extreme. But really what dissociation is anything that helps me not to have to live in the present. I can't be present right now. And so what do some of us do? We don't do the extreme. But as soon as we're feeling uncomfortable emotions we don't like, we dissociate by escaping to a little fantasy world, by getting busy with distractions, and then we don't have to think or feel or be in the present. Or, for some, they're not even able to be present to their child when their child wants to talk, because something's keeping them from just being totally present, so their mind's wandering and bouncing around, they can't concentrate. And so what we're finding is for much of ADHD, the bottom line is the child is having trouble being present. They're dissociating. That's what ADHD is, a form of dissociation. So dissociation has many guises, but it's all comes out of that trauma stuff. Okay, now this is, to me, hopefully going to be fascinating to you. So what you can see there is you've got the brain's state. So you got a calm state. Then when you're kind of alert, something's going on. But then alarm, okay, something I think bad's going on. Then fear, oh yeah, this is bad. Then terror. Okay, so those are your states. Okay, when you're calm, you're in your cortex. Okay, when you're alert, something's going on here. You're mainly in your cortex, but your limbic has been triggered. When you're alarmed, now you've gone to your limbic brain. So what I want you to see is you've gone from your cortex down to your earlier brain, to your child brain. When you're in fear, you're going even further down in your brain. Now you're in your limbic, but you're going into your brain stem. That's your ultimate survival part of your brain. And when you're in terror, you're totally in your brain stem. Okay? That's all because of cortisol. So what cortisol basically does is this. We're in danger, I think. Oh no, we're terrorized. More cortisol, more cortisol, more cortisol. What it does, it starts shutting down the brain. I don't need you right now, I just need to survive. Okay, I don't need you because I just need to survive. I just need these parts of the brain. So it starts shutting down parts of the brain and going further and further to the lower parts of the brain. So look at the very bottom, your IQ. When you're calm and in your cortex, most of us have an IQ of 120 to 100. When you're alert, your IQ just dropped by 10. When you're alarmed, drop by 10 more. When you're in fear, drop by 10 more. When you're in terror, you got real stupid. So your brain is shutting down the thinking parts of the brain and going to the reaction parts of the brain. And it's saying we don't have time to think, we've got to act. And so your IQ gets lower and lower and lower the more your stress goes up, the more your fear goes up. And so as it gets lower, that's where the opioids come in, that's where the dissociation stuff comes in. When you get to the fear, then you're into starting to dissociate. Should we be cortisol or should we start releasing opioids and retreating inward? So again, fascinating stuff that comes out of the brain research. So the next thing that happens because of trauma is it changes your brain and its ability to read your 5 senses. So if you talk to people from trauma, they will have usually 2 of the senses that they are most aware of. They're hypersensitive to noise and to light. So many can't sleep unless they have a white noise machine or earplugs in. They're hypersensitive to light. And that's just because the trauma so affected them and their brain that their senses are out of whack. For some, it gradually comes back. For some, it just never totally comes back. And it's a very, very frustrating thing. Some even get tinnitus, where they have that ringing in their ear, that high pitch in their ear. That's just very, very frustrating to live with. Okay, the next one, this is huge, and hopefully you're alert enough still to concentrate. Dr. Bruce Lipton is a neuroscientist that has spent years researching what we call our subconscious brain. So we have our conscious brain that is consciously thinking about things, doing things. Then we have our subconscious brain that is kind of an autopilot. So if you get up in the morning, I don't know how many of you, you're half asleep, but you're making coffee, you're getting the toast on, and you're not even there. Like you're just in autopilot. That's your subconscious brain. Or you're driving, but you're talking to somebody, you're looking at the scenery. Your subconscious brain is driving. Your conscious brain is doing other things. So that was his focus. Now this is so important to understand. Our subconscious brain, and I'll get to this in more detail, but our subconscious brain is working in over 90% of the time. It processes 40 million bits of data a second. That just blows my mind. Now it's in 2 areas, okay? So the first area is if you just take the 5 senses. So our eyes, with all the rods and cones through that nerve, gives our brain 10 million bits of data a second. And our subconscious brain is processing all of that. Every time we're outside, all the temperature gauges, I'm cold, I'm hot. That's our subconscious brain. And then it speeds our heart up, it cools us down, it makes us sweat. It takes care of all of those systems. If somebody touches you or you start to I feel like I'm getting a blister, that's your subconscious brain is picking up all of that stuff. So your subconscious brain is processing 400 million bits of data a second. I can't even get my head around that. That is such a big thing. Then you think of your whole internal, it's also processing. I'm feeling a bit thirsty. I'm feeling nauseous. I'm feeling hungry. I climb stairs and I automatically start breathing a little bit faster. So that's your subconscious brain. And then your balance, your digestion, all your internal organs, subconscious brain is taking care of all of that, so I never have to think about it. And it doesn't come into my conscious brain. There's a second thing that our subconscious brain does, and it's like a reporter or a history writer that's constantly recording everything that happens to me to try and find patterns, to try and make sense. So if a child, every time Dad hit them, Dad was wearing Old Spice, their subconscious brain is saying, Old Spice, get hurt. Pattern. And it puts it into a program in the subconscious brain. Every time you cried, you got smacked. Subconscious brain. Cry, get hurt. Every time Dad is drunk, bad stuff happens. Subconscious brain. Dad drunk, be on guard. Bad things happen. So it's creating pattern. So it's writing all of this program stuff subconsciously. Okay, so if you take that to riding a bike, when you ride a bike, at first you got to use your conscious brain. You are concentrating on keeping your balance and keeping the steering wheel going the right way and your feet pedaling. And you don't get that at first, man. You're flopping and falling. And it takes a lot of work because your conscious brain is trying to put together the right pieces. But your subconscious brain is down there taking notes and figuring it out. And pretty soon you're able to ride your bike. And then after a while, you don't even have to think about it with your conscious brain anymore. You just ride your bike and you can talk to people. You can be looking around. You don't even need your hands on the handlebar because your subconscious brain has got that program down pat. You have practiced it so many times. Your conscious brain says, okay, I can forget about thinking about that because it's all taken care of. So that is your subconscious brain. So your conscious, now this is, so remember your subconscious, 40 million a second? See what your conscious is? 40. A millionth slower than your subconscious brain. And I think once we get over 50, it goes way below that. Like it's a lot of work to concentrate and get stuff figured out. But the point is this, our conscious brain is super slow. Now our subconscious brain, it just writes patterns and writes programs. It is never creative. It doesn't look for solutions, it just looks for patterns. Only our conscious brain is creative and can look for solutions. But it is slow in doing that. And it can't do it unless it's in my conscious brain and I'm thinking about it. So, now's the problem. We are in our conscious brain, they are finding only 1 to 5% a day. Our subconscious brain is running the show 95 to 99% of the time. So that's the part of the problem, okay? So the point is we basically work out of a default program autopilot, okay? All of our reactions, etc. Now, complex trauma. What's the program that is being written by the subconscious brain in complex trauma? If you're authentic, nobody wants to connect with you. That's a lie. You're being neglected, you must not matter. That's a lie. If this happens to you, you better flee. Well, that's not healthy. It let you survive, but it's sure not healthy. If you want your needs met, you better learn to manipulate. Here's how you manipulate. Here's the times that you need to manipulate. Program, subconscious, subconscious, subconscious. So basically, the subconscious mind of a person with complex trauma is filled with programs that are negative, that are full of lies, that are full of unhealthy responses. Now, how do you change that? It's possible to change it, but you can only change the subconscious program if you become conscious of it. And you can only change it when you're thinking about it, which is 1 to 5% of the day. So let me give you this example. They did this about 5 years ago. They took people that have been riding their bikes for 50 years. So your subconscious program is reinforced. You can ride your bike asleep, okay? They gave them a new bike, and if you turn the handlebars to the left, you actually went right. And if you turn the handlebars to the right, you actually went left. So they explained to these people, we've given you a bike that's going to do the exact opposite of what is normal. Now, here's what I want you to get. You realize in your conscious mind, you got that concept in a nanosecond. When I get on this bike, if I want to go left, I got to turn right. You understand that? It's clear as a bell. You want to know what happened when they got on the bike? They wanted to go right, they turned right, and they fell over because they went left. And they had to concentrate. And so they concentrated. Okay, I want to go left. Okay, turn right. Whoa, they didn't get that the first time, but they gradually got it. And then when they were just getting ready to turn, somebody say, "Hey, Jim." And they'd go back to the autopilot program. And they'd fall on their face again. You want to know how long it took them to get a new autopilot program? 6 months to a year. Of practicing, until the autopilot was changed by constantly working on it consciously. So that's what a person with complex trauma is up against. That they're trying to change an autopilot program that's been programmed wrong. But their conscious mind can only work on it 1 to 5% of the time. And then when stress comes, they tend to go back to the autopilot. And it takes 6 months to a year to start to get that program changed. And for most people, the earlier the complex trauma, you're looking at up to 10 years to get that program to become a new autopilot. So this is not a quick fix. This is rewiring your brain. And so the good news, the hope news that we have is the discovery of neuroplasticity, is that our brain can continue to grow and change right up till we die. And so we can make new brain circuits. We can rewrite that autopilot programming right up till the day we die. It takes a lot of work. It takes practice and reinforcement, but it's possible. And after a while, it's worth it. Okay? 2 final things, and I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. So the next thing that happens at a complex trauma, and I'm going to develop this more next time, is hyperarousal, startle response. So it's like that cat, and all of a sudden it's jumped up. And so when cortisol is triggered, you go into fight. It's an immediate startle response. And so that's, if you came up behind somebody who's got severe trauma and you tap them on the shoulder, I wouldn't do that. You'd probably get punched in the face because of the startle response. Okay, so that is just a characteristic, and that can cause all kinds of problems, because what you're trying to do in healing trauma is in that nanosecond when you are responding and you're going back to your survival response, you're saying, let's not do that. and let's choose a different way of responding. Meanwhile, that startle response is fueled by cortisol. So it's got a boost of energy, and you're saying, in this nanosecond, in this point right here, let's make a decision to do it differently. You don't do that perfectly the first time, or the second time, or the third. That's why this healing growth is slow and messy. Because you're retraining the autopilot and the systems that are fueled by cortisol that only give you a nanosecond to change to a new path. So it's very difficult. Okay, final one. Here's cortex, limbic. So we like to think in the West that when we get information, we process it first in our cortex, and that affects how we feel, etc. Do you realize that when we actually receive any information from the environment through our senses, it is processed first in our brain stem. Then it's processed in our limbic brain. Then it's processed finally in our cortex. That all takes only a second to go from brain stem to limbic brain, but that's a problem, and I'll show you why. So let me give you a couple things around that, okay? So when you are processing information in your brainstem has memories, your limbic brain has memories, and your cortex has memories. So when you have new information comes in, your brainstem compares it to its memories to say, is this safe? If it's safe, the limbic brain compares it to its memories and says, is it safe? Then it goes to the cortex. So, a person has been in severe battle settings. They're walking down Olette. They hear a car backfire. It gets processed first by brainstem. Brainstem says, compare that noise to other noises. This sounds like, okay, drop and roll. Go into fight or flight. It hasn't got to the cortex yet. They're already reacting because of the brainstem memories. That is the challenge with trauma. Your brain processes from the bottom up. And it reacts based on the brainstem first, and if it has memories, it reacts based on that. Now, there's a key thing to understand also about the brain. Do you realize that your cortex is the only part of your brain that can tell time? Your brainstem can't tell time. Your limbic can't tell time. So it can't go, car backfired, war, that was 20 years ago. Oh, 20 years ago? No. That happened like it was yesterday. No telling of time. And so it reacts based on if it's happening today. And so the challenge for people with complex trauma is I have to learn to manage the brainstem and the limbic brain. Because by the time it gets to the cortex, it's often too late. I've already flown into action. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along, but that you can see can be a huge challenge for many people. So, like I said, is there any hope? Yes, neuroplasticity, but like that bike, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time. So,